بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولا شبيه ولا مثيل له ولا ضد ولا ند ولا جسد ولا صورة ولا أعضاء له كان الله ولا مكان فهو الآن يشبه ذلك ومن وصف الله بمعنى من معاني البشر سيدنا محمد خاتم النبيين كلما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا حبيب الله الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا عظيم الجاه. I praise Allah, I glorify Him, and I thank Him for all the blessings that He gives without Him being obligated to give anything. And I ask Allah to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and to protect his Muslim nation. I testify no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, the one without a partner, the one without an equal, the one without a similar, the one who is unlike anything in the universe, and nothing in the universe is like Him. He has no father, no mother, no sister, no brother, no son, and no daughter. He exists without time and place because He is the creator of time and place. He does not reside above the throne, and He is not attributed with fatigue, like the Jews say. Our Lord is glorified beyond any imperfection that the non-Muslims attribute to Him. Whatever you imagine, He has to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah to get reward for that good deed. The reward is defined as the compensation that the Muslim receives in the hereafter for the good deeds that he did in this life among what makes him happy. An example of the reward that is guaranteed to the righteous Muslim in the grave is that his grave is expanded approximately 105 feet by 105 feet, and his grave is illuminated with a light similar to the light of the full moon, and the fragrance of paradise would be present in the grave. The sincere intention means for the Muslim to do the good deed, seeking the acceptance of Allah only, and not the praise of the people. So Allah is what saves the accountable person in the hereafter from dwelling forever in hellfire. So if the person is accountable, that means that they are sane, pubescent, and they have received the basic message of Islam, and they die as a Muslim, even if they had committed some sins, it's possible that they would be forgiven and that they won't be punished and that they will go to paradise and that they will not go to hellfire. But if the person is sane, pubescent, and has received the basic message of Islam, but they die as a non-Muslim, then this person, they will be dwelling in hellfire forever. So the only one who dwells in hellfire forever is the accountable non-Muslim. As for the Muslim sinner, if he goes into the hereafter with some sins without repenting, then it's possible that he be forgiven and it's possible that he would be punished. But even if he does go to hellfire for the sins that that Muslim did, then he will not stay there forever. Eventually, he will be taken out and he will enter paradise, where he will reside forever and ever after that. So that's the virtue of dying as a Muslim, is that the person is saved from going to hellfire forever. And so we're grateful and thankful to Allah that we have been guided to Islam, because had He not guided us, we would not have been guided. And we are grateful and thankful to Allah that we have been given access to the knowledge of Ahlul Sunnah, which is the saved group, those who have the same creed as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, with the connected chains of narration that authenticate and validate and confirm the information. So we're going to continue on with our subject, which is the explanation of the Matn of Abi Shujā, which is a very famous and widespread beginner's book in the Islamic law, according to the infrastructure of Al-Imam al-Shafi'i. And we got to page 181. The congregational prayer. So now we're going to talk about the congregational prayer. We're going to start first with the main text, which is above the line, if you have the book, and then we'll go on with the explanation, which is under the book. The author said, the congregational prayer is an emphasized recommendation. Footnote 257, the strong saying in the Shafi'i school is that it is a communal obligation. So, here Abu Shujā, he mentions a weak saying, and the translator here, the ones who put together this book, they put in the footnote that the strong saying in the Shafi'i school is that it is a communal obligation. So the congregational prayer is referring to praying the 5 obligatory prayers together. So the minimum that could be is the imam, the one who's leading the prayer, and 1 follower. So as a community, the males, the unexcused pubescent males, free males, that are living in that area, at least 2 of them have to come together for those 5 daily prayers, to perform those 5 daily prayers together. And if they fail to do that, if they fall short in doing that, then all those who are able would be sinful. But if only 2 amongst the community, if they fulfill that, if they pray those 5 daily prayers in congregation, then the rest of them are absolved. So that's what it means, a communal obligation. It means at least some of those who are obligated to fulfill that obligation, they have to do it. And if none of them do it, all of them are sinful. And if some of them fulfill it, take care of it, then it absolves the rest. It is on the follower, Matn, to intend to follow and not the imam. Footnote 258, the leader, so when we say imam, the leader when praying. And not only imam, to intend to lead. It is permissible for the free person to follow the slave, and for the pubescent to follow the one who is not yet pubescent, but he is approaching pubescence. It is not valid for a man to follow a woman, nor for a reciter to follow one who cannot recite. Wherever the Matn, the follower, prays behind the imam in the masjid while being knowledgeable about the imam's prayer, then it is sufficient as long as one does not precede the imam. If the imam prayed in the masjid and the Matn follower was outside the masjid, close to it, while knowing about the prayer of the imam, and there was no barrier there, then it is valid. So that's just the main text. Now we're going to go to the explanation. Among the proofs for the rewardability and the validity of the prayer in congregation is the hadith narrated by Bukhari, which means the prayer in congregation is 25 times more rewardable than praying alone. So the reward of praying in congregation is 25 times more than the reward of praying alone. So this is citing the evidence for this judgment, which is that it's 25 times more rewardable to pray in congregation than it is to pray alone. And so the mujtahids, they deduce from that, like a Shafi'i, he deduced from that it is a communal obligation, and through other evidences. But we know the high rewardability of this congregational prayer because of that narration that the Prophet ﷺ said. So in the science of narration, it's a very intricate science by which it is verified if the Prophet ﷺ said it or not. And inshallah, in the future, if we get to study some of those books, then we can go into the details of that science. But basically, any narration that is suitable to be used as evidence in the law or in the creed has to have a connected chain, so no missing links, and it has to have each individual in that chain has to satisfy the criteria for trustworthiness and accuracy, and it has to be known that they actually heard those narrations from the person that they're narrating it from. So it has to be verified. That person, who he was, so his first name, his last name, his father's name, who he studied from, who he learned from, where he was, his behavior, his character, did he adhere to the etiquettes of his pious peers, all those details that are related to the criteria for trustworthiness. So every single individual in that chain of narration would be vetted in that way. And so then once each individual has been verified who they are and that they meet the criteria for trustworthiness, that they meet the criteria for accuracy, then that chain is considered confirmed. So if a piece of information comes to us from the Prophet ﷺ through a confirmed chain, then that means we're obligated to follow it. So this is among the things that has come through a confirmed chain, which is that the Prophet ﷺ said, the prayer in congregation is 25 times more rewardable than praying alone. So we know that the congregational prayer has a high rewardability. The author said that praying in congregation is a recommended matter, which the Prophet ﷺ was keen to do. So that's what he meant in the text when he said emphasize recommendation. It means that the Prophet ﷺ would make sure and take care that when he prayed in congregation. What the author is referring to is to conduct the prayers in congregation when praying the 5 obligatory prayers. But it is not the strong saying in the Shafi'i school. The strong saying is that praying in congregation in the 5 obligatory prayers is a communal obligation, not just a recommended matter. So the recommended, this status, this label, it is less than the obligation, because the recommended matter, if the Muslim leaves it out, he's not blameworthy, and he's not sinful. He won't be punished for that in the hereafter. He won't be no negative repercussions would occur to him as a result of leaving out that recommended matter. But for the communal obligation, it's how he said, it's if no one in the community does it, then they're all sinful. They all have that sin written against them. And if some of them take care of it, then it absolves the rest. This is a communal obligation. And this is also an obligation, meaning it has the category of an obligation. There's also the personal obligation, which is each individual has to do it, like the 5 daily prayers themselves. So each one of us that is accountable, that is sane, pubescent, and has received the basic message of Islam, the Muslim who is accountable, he has to pray those 5 daily prayers. So that's on him personally. He has to make sure that on every single day he prays those 5 daily prayers. Now it's a communal obligation to make sure that those 5 daily prayers are prayed in congregation. So if some of them do it, the rest are absolved. If none of them do it, and they all fell short in that, then they are all blameworthy. They all get a sin for that. In the prayer of Jumu'ah, which is the Friday prayer, however, it is a personal obligation to pray in congregation. What is meant with communal obligation here is upon the pubescent males who are free, who are not in a state of travel, and who are not excused. It is neither a communal obligation on the women, nor on the one who is not pubescent, nor on the slave, nor on the one who is traveling, nor on those who have an excuse to leave out praying in congregation. An excuse for one not to go and pray in congregation is like if one is afraid for oneself to be killed or for someone to cut his hand or take his money. So if there was some physical harm or proprietary harm for going to the place where the congregation is being held, then that Muslim in particular, he's excused. He's not included amongst those who have to fulfill this communal obligation because he himself is not able. Another example is, let's say if he's sick, he's not able to, let's say, get out of bed and go. He still has to pray the 5 daily prayers, of course, in the way that he can, whether on his side or lying down or whatever the case may be, but he wouldn't be included among those who are addressed with the communal obligation of having to pray them in congregation. So, for example, if on the way to the mosque, let's say there's an enemy and that would shoot them or kill them or bomb them, then they would be excused. They would not be included among those who went to or that had to fulfill the communal obligation. They would be judged as excused. Going back to footnote 260, it says the follower must intend to follow the imam in prayer, otherwise it would count as an individual prayer. But if one, while saying the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, did not intend to pray in congregation the Friday prayer or the repeated prayer, or what one vows to pray in congregation, or the combined prayer due to rain, in these cases, the prayer would not be valid. This is so because there are prayers that are done only in congregation. Therefore, the intention of the follower and the imam needs to be to perform them in congregation. One does not need to know the name of the imam one is following. It is enough to intend to follow the person in front who is leading the prayers. However, if one specified a person as the imam that he is following, and it turns out to be someone else was the imam, in this case the follower's prayer is invalid because he tied his prayer with someone who was not in prayer. And if someone thought that Zayd was the imam, and the follower intended to follow Zayd, the one standing in front leading the prayer, but it turned out it was someone else, in this case, the prayer is still valid because he intended to follow the person in front who was leading, but he made a mistake in identifying that person. In this case, it is valid because he tied his prayer with someone who was there leading the prayer. So, these details here are pertaining to the intention when entering into the prayer. So, when the follower, he enters into the prayer, he doesn't have to, at the onset, when he enters into the prayer by saying Allahu Akbar, because the way to enter the prayer is you stand, you face the Qibla, and you say Allahu Akbar. So while saying that, in the Shafi'i school, the one who's praying has to have the intention that he's praying. And if he's a follower, he doesn't have to have the intention that he's following, but before he follows the imam, even after joining the prayer, he has to intend that he's following that imam. But let's say that he does intend to follow the imam, when saying Allahu Akbar. So in the case of the prayer, that it's only valid if it's prayed together in congregation, then in that case, he has to make the intention of following the imam while saying Allahu Akbar. In the case where the prayer can be prayed alone or in congregation, then the intention must be made at some point before following the imam. So let's say that he intends to follow the imam, and when he intends to follow the imam, he specified a person as the imam. He thought it was Zayd, and he specified him. And it turns out that it was someone else, not Zayd. So when he made the intention, he said, I now intend to pray the afternoon prayer following Zayd as the imam. And then it turns out that Zayd was not the imam. So then his prayer is not valid. The follower, his prayer is not valid because he tied his prayer with someone who was not in the prayer, with someone who wasn't even leading the prayer. And in the other case, he thought it was Zayd, right? In his mind, he thought it was Zayd. But when he made the intention, he intended to follow the one standing in front leading the prayer. So in that case, he didn't name a person, But he thought that the person that was standing in front leading the prayer was Zayd, but then it turned out it wasn't him. In this case, the prayer of the follower is valid because he actually intended to follow the one who was leading the prayer. It's just that in his mind he thought that that person that was in front leading the prayer was Zayd, but he did not specify him in his intention. Continuing on, the author said, an excuse, or mentioned that. Page 183. What is meant with communal obligation is that if some of the inhabitants of a village, a town, or a city perform it in congregation, the others are not sinful if they pray alone. However, if all of them leave praying in congregation without an excuse, then all of them are sinful. For the communal obligation to be fulfilled, the prayer has to be done in a way that the rite of congregation would be an apparent matter. So here the term rite is R-I-T-E, and which means it's ritual. So that means that in order for it to be a place in which it's counted as where the communal obligation is fulfilled, then that place has to be an apparent matter. And that prayer that is done together, it has to be an apparent matter. It would be conducted in a place in a way that anyone who wants to pray in congregation could easily reach that place. It is not kept secret behind closed doors that no one knows about. For the communal obligation to happen in a small town, it is enough to conduct it in a way that anyone who wants to pray congregation can easily do that. As for the big city, the congregation would be conducted in different areas of the city in a way that anyone who wants to pray in congregation, it would be easy for him to do that. So in a big city, it is enough to conduct it in one place. It is not enough to conduct it in one place, because those who live in a big city, away from that place, it would not be easy for them to find a place to pray in congregation. Hence, it needs to be done in different areas. So anyone who wants to pray congregation in that city would easily get to the place. So it can't be, for example, like your own personal apartment. So even if someone, like, let's say, and they made it so that they, let's say, put a schedule and stuff like that, because a person might feel shy to enter somebody's personal space so they can do the congregational prayer. So it has to be a place that is open to the public, that anyone who's looking to pray the congregational prayer, they can easily find it. So the author was saying that if it's in a small town and they have it in one location and it's easy for everyone in that town to go to that location, then this is sufficient. If it's a big city and it's not easy for everyone to do it in that one location, then they need to have it in different locations. And they need to have it in a way where every single person or all the people who are living in that city, they can easily get to it if they wanted to. The author said, the follower has to have the intention of congregation and not the imam of the prayer, except in the prayers which are not valid unless they are prayed in congregation. This means for the prayer of the follower to be considered a congregational prayer, this follower needs to make the intention of the congregational prayer. So if he comes to the mosque and he says, Allahu Akbar, to start the prayer with the intention of the prayer, but without making the intention of following the imam, without making the intention that he is praying in congregation, in this case his prayer is considered as praying alone, even if he is standing with the others. On the other hand, if the imam is praying and someone comes and stands behind him and starts praying without having the intention of praying in congregation, and this person who is truly praying alone and not following the imam, if he waits for the imam to bow for ruku', which is bowing, so that he would bow, or he waits for the imam to prostrate before he prostrates, that is, he acts like a follower without being a follower, he acts like he is following the imam while truly he is not, his prayer is invalid. If, however, by coincidence he makes ruku', the bowing, after the imam, meaning he did not wait for the imam to make ruku', but after the imam made ruku', he finished reciting what he wanted to recite, so it was a mere coincidence. In this case, his prayer is not invalidated. So here the author is just making clear that if someone stands behind someone praying, and they don't intend to follow that person in the prayer, but they wait for them to move so that they can move. So they act as if they're following them, but without intending to follow them, this invalidates the prayer of the follower. But if the follower is going at his own pace, and it just happens to be that when that person in front of him goes down, he goes down. When that person in front of him comes up, he comes up. When that person goes to prostration, he goes to prostration. Because he's going at his own pace, but it just happens that the timing appears that after the leader does it, the imam does it, then the follower does it. This does not invalidate the prayer of the follower, because in reality, he's not following him, it's just coincidental. For the intention of congregation to be valid, it is enough for the follower to intend in his heart that I follow in this prayer the person who is standing in front of us all. He does not have to mention his name. It is also not a condition that he sees the imam. As for the imam, he is not obligated to make the intention of being an imam when praying dhuhr, for example, the noon prayer. He can stand as an imam in the prayer of dhuhr without having the intention of leading the prayer, except when praying the congregational prayer and the prayers which are not valid, except if they are prayed in congregation. In those prayers, he has to make the intention of being an imam, to be praying in congregation, so it would be valid. So in other than those prayers that are only prayed in congregation, if the imam leads the prayer without having the intention that he is the imam, or he knows there are people following him, but he does not make the intention, in this case his prayer is valid. But he does not acquire the reward of the congregation, because he did not make the intention of praying congregation. So this case is very simple, very straightforward. Basically, the prayers that are required to be prayed in congregation, that also applies to the imam. So if the imam, he is going to lead the prayer that is only valid in congregation, then in that case, when he says Allahu Akbar to begin the prayer, he has to make the intention that he is the imam. If he fails to do that, his prayer is not valid. And that prayer itself wouldn't be valid because they would not be praying in congregation. Now for the prayers that they can be prayed alone or they can be prayed in congregation, if the imam does not make the intention of being the imam when he's praying, so he gets the reward for praying, but he doesn't get the reward of congregation because he didn't make the intention of being the imam. So that is the breakdown for that. And that's what the author was talking about. And what the author was referring to in that case. It says it is a condition for the validity of the prayer of the follower that he stands behind the imam in the prayer. So the follower, he has to stand behind the imam. What does that mean? And it means that his physical placement, where he is standing, his physical placement has to be behind the imam. He knows he is not ahead of the imam by his heels. That is, the heels of the follower should not be ahead of the heels of the imam while standing, and the buttocks should not be ahead of the imam while sitting. If the heels of the follower are ahead of those of the imam, this invalidates the prayer of the follower. It is permissible for the free person to follow the prayer of the slave. Footnote 63. It is permissible for the free person to follow the slave in prayer, and for the pubescent to follow the non-pubescent, meaning the one who reached the age of mental discrimination. Here, permissible does not mean it is better. One would follow a hierarchy, an order of rank for the position of leading, because the position of leading in prayer is important. So it is better to follow the order in rank. And usually it goes by the knowledge of the one who is leading the prayer. So if he is the most knowledgeable in the law amongst those that are there, that are going to pray, then he takes precedence over others. That's one of the criteria for that. The author said, this means it is permissible for the slave to lead the prayer of the free person. Also, it is permissible for one to pray behind the person who is fasiq, that is, the one who commits enormous sins. So if someone commits enormous sins, it is permissible to pray behind him, but it is disliked. This is in regards to the one who is committing enormous sins in what pertains to the actions. As for the one who is a deviator from the creed of Ahlul Sunnah, meaning the enormous sinner whose sin is not by drinking alcohol, stealing, or the like, rather his enormous sin is having the conviction which does not comply with the conviction of Ahlul Sunnah. If his deviation reached the level of blasphemy, then it is not permissible to pray behind him. An example of a person who is an enormous sinner who deviates from the belief of Ahlul Sunnah and his deviation reaches the level of blasphemy, kufr, is the one who denies the qadr, the one who denies that everything occurs in this universe according to God's will. So there are some people who they claim to be Muslim. There are some people that they say that they are they claim that they believe in God and His Messenger, but these people, they believe, and in reality, they're not telling the truth. In reality, they're not believers in God and His Messenger. Because why? Because they believe that there are some things that happen in this world that does not occur by God's will. They believe that there are some things that happen in this world that happens against God's will. So these people, they are blasphemers, and they're not Muslim, but they attribute themselves to Islam. So if there was such a person who claimed to be Muslim, and he was supposedly trying to lead the prayer, anyone who stood behind him and without knowing his situation, they didn't know his situation, but anyone who stood behind him and did that, their prayer would not be valid. And for sure, they still need to do those prayers. Their prayer would not be valid. Then he said, it is not permissible to pray behind such a person, even if he claims to be a Muslim. For example, if someone claims that Allah is not the creator of people's deeds, and that the slaves themselves create their deeds, such a person has a creed which does not comply with the belief of Ahlul Sunnah. His creed is blasphemy. So it is not permissible to pray behind him. In some books authored by some Shafi'i scholars, when they wrote that it is permissible to follow the when they wrote that it is permissible to follow the Mu'tazili in the prayer, they meant by that the one who identifies himself with the Mu'tazila but does not have their blasphemous convictions. So he has some of their convictions, but he does not believe that Allah does not create the deeds of the slave, because having that belief is clear blasphemy, kufr. So it does occur sometimes that a person, they would have a mistake in the creed, but that mistake doesn't reach to the level where they are outside the fold of Islam, where they are judged as being exited from Islam. So those who have that deviance, but that their deviance did not reach to the level of blasphemy, it didn't reach to the level where they are now labeled as a non-Muslim, it's still forbidden to pray behind them. And that's what the meaning of what some scholars, they wrote in their books, some Sunni scholars wrote in their books, that it is permissible to follow the Mu'tazili. Because generally speaking, the creed that the Mu'tazili has is a blasphemous creed. And what does that mean? That means that among their creeds, the whole entirety of their creed is blasphemous, because they believe that the slave, they believe that the human being creates his own actions, which is saying that the human being is a god. And so, of course, that is blasphemy, because in Islam, we say only the creator is God, and the creation is not God. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, there are some people who associate themselves with that group, but they don't believe, or they're not aware, or they don't believe the other creeds, those blasphemous creeds. They believe that God is the creator of everything happens according to God's will. So they have the correct belief about that, but they think, or they believe something that those people adhere to that doesn't reach the level of blasphemy. So there are some aspects of what they believe, for example, like they say, which is the incorrect thing, they say that after we die and when we are in paradise, that we will not be able to see, that God will not give us the ability in our eyes to see Him, because they say that anything that is seen has to be in a direction, has to have a shape, has to have a size. And so they say it is impossible that God be seen because He is not in a direction, He is not in a location, He is not an image, He does not have a shape, He does not have a size. So they say God will not be seen in the hereafter. The Sunni Muslim, which is what is correct, we say God will give us the ability to see Him unlike the creation is seen. So we can't imagine that now, but we're going to be given the ability to see God, the one who is not like us, who exists without a place, who exists without location, without direction, who exists without length, width, and depth, who exists without size and shape and volume and color and stillness and movement. All these physical properties, they don't apply to God. He exists, we know that for sure, and He will give us the ability in our eyes to see Him and in the hereafter, unlike the creation is seen. So that's something that we have to believe in. We have to know that for sure, that we're going to see God in the hereafter without God being in a place, without God being in a direction, without God having an image. And we say that God is going to grant our eyes the ability to see what does not have an image, to see what does not have a size, shape, color, volume, direction, location, etc. Because what makes it valid for something to be seen is just that it exists. So as long as something exists, then it's valid for it to be seen. And God can give us the ability to see Him, even though He is not in a place or a direction. But that misguided group, that they're called the Mu'tazila, they said, God is not like us, God is not in a location, God is not in a direction, therefore He can't be seen. And we say, it is not necessary that in order for something to be seen, that it be in a direction or a location. So that's the disagreement between us. So that, and of course they're misguided for that, but just that part, if they say God can't be seen in the hereafter because God is not in a location, God is not like us, etc., they're wrong. God can be seen without a place, without a direction, without an image. But we can't imagine that right now, of course, but we have to believe in that because it's mentioned in the Quran. But those people who negate that, they're negating it based on, they think the only thing that can be seen is something that is a body, something that has an image, something that has a location. So that's why they said God will not be seen in the hereafter. So they're wrong for that, and that mistake that they made doesn't reach to the level where they are judged as a non-Muslim, but they do have that mistake in the creed, and they're wrong for that. They're an enormous sinner. So when those scholars in the Shafi'i school, they wrote in their books that it is valid to pray behind the one who is a Mu'tazili, they meant the one who his deviance and his guidance didn't reach to the level of blasphemy. That's a whole wide subject that, inshallah, one day we'll also do a deep dive on that. But for now, we're just reading what is mentioned here. The author said, furthermore, it is valid for the pubescent person to pray behind the non-pubescent person. Judge Abu Shujā is saying that a man is allowed to follow in the prayer a boy who is not pubescent but reached the age of mental discrimination. And likewise, a pubescent woman is allowed to follow a boy or girl who reached the age of mental discrimination. Note, it is permissible for the blind man to lead the one who is not blind in the prayer. It is not permissible for a woman to lead a man in the prayer. If it is not known yet about a hermaphrodite, if their extra organ is the male or the female truly, then men do not follow it in prayer, because it might appear later that this is a female. So basically, this case about the vague hermaphrodite, or the hermaphrodite who is not sure which gender they are, So basically what happens is that sometimes the human being is born with both reproductive organs, or with both organs, with both private parts. Sometimes a person is born with a penis and with a vagina. But usually the case is that the person who is born with that condition, they know which one is the original one, which one is the one that is actually functioning, and which one is the one that is not functioning. So the person who was born with both organs, usually there's one of them that is just extra, meaning that, for example, if the person had both a penis and a vagina, he would, for example, urinate from only one of them. Or he would get the period, for example. And whatever he has like as a penis, it doesn't urinate or anything. Nothing happens from it. It's just there. So this person that it's clear which one is the original organ and which one is the extra one, then his gender goes by the organ. So this is an issue, something that Islamically has been tackled, or that has been dealt with and addressed a long time ago. So, the meaning of that is that the person's gender is based on their organ. That's how their gender is defined, by their organ. That's the Islamic stance, and which is obviously the correct stance, because these stances are, these judgments are known through the revelation. So what God revealed, what God judged, and this is what we go by, and that is what is correct, regardless of whoever criticizes or says something to the opposite. And basically, if someone says the opposite of what God judged, they have no evidence, they have no proof, they have no real grounds for saying it. It's just a whim. And so that doesn't make it valid. Just because that's how they feel or that's their opinion, that doesn't make it valid. We won't abandon what God judged for the opinions of a random person. But sometimes though, it is unclear for that hermaphrodite which one is the extra one, which one is the original one. So in that case, as long as it is unclear to them which one is the extra one, which one is the original one, then for these types of cases, they are treated like a female. So, for example, it's not valid for a woman to lead a man in the prayer. So, if there was a hermaphrodite that their situation was unclear, it would be invalid for them to lead men in the prayer. If there was a hermaphrodite its situation was unclear, then when they go outside, they have to dress like a woman, because that's the precaution, etc. Those are the judgments pertaining to the unclear hermaphrodite. So that's what he's referring to here. The unclear hermaphrodite, men do not follow him in prayer, because it might appear later that this is a female, because eventually there's ways to tell. For example, like if they have an inclination towards men, for example, more than women, then they're judged as a male, etc. They figure it out. There's a way for them to figure it out. But until they do, then it's not valid for them to lead men in the congregational prayer. Also, it is not permissible for a person about whom it is not known yet if they are male or female to pray behind a female, because he might be a male. So same thing. And in the case of leading the prayer, treated like a male, like a female. In the case of following, because it might later turn out to be that he's a male, then he can't follow a woman. So the hermaphrodite who their situation is unclear, then it's not valid for them to lead the prayer of men, and it's not valid for them to follow a woman in the prayer. Also, it is not permissible for someone about whom it is not known yet whether they are male or female to pray behind someone who has the same situation, because the imam might appear later to be a female and the follower might appear to be a male, and so it would not be valid. Moreover, it is not permissible for a person who recites Al-Fatiha properly to pray behind a person who does not recite Al-Fatiha properly. 264, footnote 264. If it is not valid for the one who reads Al-Fatiha correctly to be led by someone who does not. Meaning, if the follower knows that the Imam does not pronounce the Fatiha correctly, and despite that he followed him in prayer, his prayer would be invalid. If the Imam is truly unable to recite the verbal integrals other than the Fatiha because of a letter that he is unable to pronounce correctly, this does not affect the validity of the follower's prayer who can recite properly. So this is just an extra detail. And what does it mean about following someone who recites the Fatiha properly? And it means if someone cannot recite Al-Fatiha in the proper way, whether due to laziness or because of an illness in one's tongue, or other than that, so he is unable to pronounce, for example, the letter Sin, Sad, or Ra in the proper way. In this case, it is not permissible for the one who recites properly to take this person as an Imam. So the one who can recite properly, he doesn't pray behind someone who cannot pronounce the letters properly. The prayer would not be valid, for the one who is following. If the person who is not able to pronounce a letter among the letters of the Fatiha properly, then he does not recite from the Fatiha the part that contains that letter. Rather, he replaces it as mentioned in the previous section about the integrals of the prayer. One is not allowed to commit mistakes intentionally. So sometimes the person, they have a speech impediment where they pronounce like a certain letter in place of another. Can't think of an example now in English, but in Arabic, they have the one who, instead of pronouncing the letter tha, he pronounces the letter sin. So he'll say hadith, for example, because of a speech impediment. If that's the case, then it's not valid for someone who can recite properly to follow him. If the follower follows the Imam, and they are both in one masjid, it is valid regardless of the distance between them, as long as the follower knows the movements of the Imam and he does not go ahead of his Imam. So in a place that is considered a masjid, that means that it's waqaf. What does that mean? It means that it was this location, it was designated to be a mosque in that specific way, in the specific way according to the Islamic law. So in this case, if it was a big mosque, and let's say the Imam was standing at the place where he stands, and then there was someone, let's say 100 yards away, that wanted to follow that Imam, it would be valid as long as the person who's following, as long as he can keep up with the prayer of the Imam. As long as he knows the movements of the Imam and does not go ahead of the Imam. When the follower is following the Imam, there are different cases. Either both of them, the Imam and follower, are inside the mosque, or one is inside the mosque and the other is outside of it, or they are both outside the mosque. When they are both inside the mosque, it does not affect the validity of the prayer if the distance between the Imam and the follower is very big. As long as the Imam and the follower are both in the mosque, they are considered together. So if the Imam is in the mihrab, which is this thing here, praying, and a person enters the mosque and chooses to stand inside the mosque but at the door, and there are no lines in between them, and he makes the intention of following the Imam in prayer, the long distance does not invalidate the congregational prayer, even if it were 1,000 yards or more, with the condition that the follower knows about the movements of the Imam. Of course, at 1,000 yards, it's going to be tough. This means he has to know when the Imam bows for ruku', when he straightens up, when he goes down to sujood, prostration, etc. This happens by seeing the Imam, or seeing someone who sees the Imam, or hearing the voice of the Imam, or hearing what the conveyor says about the Imam, whether the conveyor is praying or not. There might be a person standing there who is not praying, and he tells the people who are away from the Imam about what the Imam is doing. And of course, in the past, this was more common because there wasn't loudspeakers and things like that. So in this case, the prayer of the follower is valid because he knows about the movements of the Imam, and Allah Ta'ala knows best. We will stop here for now. Page 187. We still got another page and a half to go for the congregational prayer, and then we will go to shortening and combining the prayers. But that's it for now. We just covered from 181 to 187. If there are no questions, we'll conclude. Go ahead and type it in. طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات بارك الله فيكم السلام عليكم